The banker's name was Richard Hale. He was in his early 40s, sharp suit, polished shoes, and a schedule so full it left no room for pauses. Richard worked at one of the largest banks in the city. He had climbed his way up from an entry-level job to a corner office with glass walls and a view of the skyline from the outside. Richard's life looked perfect. A high salary, a modern apartment, a luxury car parked in a private garage. People respected him, sometimes even feared him. But inside, his life felt like a race he could never win. Every day was about numbers, targets, profits, and losses. He measured success in digits and deadlines. Each morning, Richard walked the same route from the subway to his office. And every morning, he passed the same beggar sitting near the bank's entrance. The beggar was an older man, maybe in his late 60s. His beard was gray and uneven, his coat thin and worn. He sat on a piece of cardboard with a small cup in front of him. He never shouted. He never grabbed at anyone. He simply looked up at passers-by with tired eyes and said, "Good morning. God bless you." Most people didn't answer. Richard noticed him, but only as part of the background, like a lamppost or a trash can. Sometimes the sight annoyed him. It felt out of place near the polished marble steps of the bank. A reminder of a world Richard preferred not to think about. One cold winter morning, Richard was running late. A major meeting awaited him, one that could decide his next promotion. As he rushed toward the entrance, he heard the beggar's voice again. "Good morning, sir. Stay warm today." Richard didn't slow down. But for some reason, the words stuck with him. Stay warm. It was such a small thing to say, yet it carried a strange kindness. Still, Richard pushed the thought aside and disappeared into the building. That day did not go as planned. The meeting turned tense. A risky investment Richard had approved months earlier was now failing. Losses were piling up, and the board was not happy. For the first time in years, Richard felt something unfamiliar at work: fear. Real fear. By the time he left the office, the sun had set, an icy wind cut through the streets. Richard's shoulders felt heavier than usual as he stepped outside. The beggar was still there. This time, Richard slowed down. He noticed the man's hands were red from the cold. His shoes had holes in the soles. The small cup in front of him held only a few coins. Without fully understanding why, Richard stopped. "Why are you still here?" Richard asked, his tone sharper than he intended. The beggar looked up and smiled gently. "Because people are still walking by." Something about that answer caught Richard off guard. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a few bills. More than he had ever given before. He dropped them into the cup and turned to leave. "Thank you," the beggar said softly. "You have a good heart, even if you don't know it yet." Richard froze for a second, then walked away, shaking his head. He told himself it was nothing. Just a moment of guilt, but it wasn't nothing. Over the next few weeks, Richard began to notice the beggar more. He learned the man's name was Samuel. Sometimes they exchanged a few words. Samuel never asked questions about Richard's job or his life. He just listened. One morning, Richard brought an extra coffee and handed it to Samuel. Another day, he brought a sandwich. These small acts didn't feel like charity. They felt human. Slowly, conversations grew longer. Samuel shared pieces of his past. He had once worked as a mechanic. He had a wife, a daughter, a house in a quiet town. Then his wife got sick. Medical bills drained their savings. After she passed, grief took everything else. One bad decision led to another. Eventually, Samuel found himself on the streets. "I didn't become this overnight," Samuel said one day. "It happened step by step." Richard listened in silence. For the first time, the world felt less divided into winners and losers. It felt fragile, then life tested them both. A few months later, the bank faced a massive scandal. An internal investigation revealed deep financial problems. Executives were fired. Departments were cut. Richard lost his job in a single day, his identity collapsed. Without his income, his savings vanished faster than he expected. Bills piled up. Friends stopped calling. The apartment he loved became too expensive. Eventually, Richard found himself packing his belongings into boxes, unsure of what came next. One evening, feeling completely lost, Richard walked past the bank out of habit. He hadn't realized where his feet were taking him until he saw Samuel's familiar spot. Samuel was there. "You look tired," Samuel said gently. Richard sat down on the cold pavement beside him. For the first time in his life, Richard didn't care about how it looked. Words spilled out. The job. The fear. The shame. Samuel listened, just as Richard once listened to him. "Money comes and goes," Samuel said after a while. "But who you are stays. Don't let this moment define you." Those words stayed with Richard. Days turned into weeks. Richard took temporary work. It paid little, but it kept him moving. On his lunch breaks, he brought food to Samuel. They shared meals, laughter, and silence. One afternoon, a non-profit outreach team stopped by. They offered Samuel a place in a shelter and help finding work. Samuel hesitated, then agreed. Before leaving, Samuel turned to Richard. "You reminded me I still mattered," he said. "That gave me strength to try again." Months later, Richard received a call from a former colleague. A smaller firm needed someone with his skills. The job wasn't glamorous, but it was honest. Richard accepted. On his first paycheck, he did something he had never done before. He donated part of it to the shelter that helped Samuel. A year passed. One sunny morning, Richard walked past the old bank building. Near the entrance stood a man in clean clothes, holding a toolbox. It took Richard a moment to recognize him. Samuel smiled. "I'm fixing the ATM today." They laughed like old friends. In that moment, Richard realized something powerful. Kindness had saved them both. Not because it solved every problem, but because it reminded them they were not alone, and that is the quiet power of kindness. It doesn't ask who deserves it. It doesn't check bank accounts or titles. It simply reaches out, and in doing so, it changes lives in ways we may never fully see. As you go about your day, remember this story. A small act. A warm word. A moment of care. You never know whose life it might change. Maybe even your own. Some moments change a life forever, not with noise or applause, but with a quiet choice made in the middle of an ordinary day. A choice to look twice. A choice to care. This story begins on a crowded city street, where thousands of people passed by every day without seeing what truly mattered. It's a story about two men who seemed to live in different worlds. One had everything money could buy. The other barely had a coat. And yet, kindness would tie their lives together in a way neither of them could have imagined. Take a second to support Kindness Story Hub. If stories like this touch your heart, please subscribe to the channel, like this video, and share your thoughts in the comments. Your support helps us spread more stories of hope, compassion, and humanity.